The Coast Guard seizes a 78-year-old veteran's boat. 1 hour later, his son leads a helicopter squad in pursuit of justice. Why did they take the Tide's grace? What memories does she hold? And what makes the Louisiana waters erupt when the helicopters appear? This is not just the story of a confiscated vessel. It is a journey of compassion, father-son devotion, and timeless loyalty. Join us as we uncover the story of Arthur Ramsey, a Navy veteran whose actions reminded his community of the true value of sacrifice and charity. Don't look away. This tale will carry you from injustice to a glorious climax where truth blazes like fire. Hit subscribe so you never miss another soul-stirring story. At the edge of Louisiana's coastal marshes, where sails fade into the salt fog, lies a harbor called Port Fourchon. Amidst broken shells, rusted fishing rods, and the dawn cries of gulls, lives a man named Arthur Ramsey. He is never the subject of newspaper headlines, nor the focus of town council meetings. Yet here, everyone knows Old Arthur. Arthur Ramsey, 78 years old, served in the U.S. Navy. Now he is the quiet soul of the harbor, a silent icon, yet indispensable. Every morning he dons his faded naval jacket, frayed at the shoulders, cradles an old photograph of his former crew. Silver hair, like drifting smoke, brushes beneath his weathered captain's hat. He strides onto the dock with a posture once at home on rolling ship decks. Tide's Grace, his oak-hulled boat, has lain moored here for 35 years. Its timbers bear the cracks of time, its ropes worn smooth by countless hands. Yet in the wheelhouse hangs a small wooden plaque carved with only 2 words: hope. To passers-by, it's merely an old vessel, but to Port Fourchon's residents, it is a symbol of delivering food to homes stranded by the 1985 storm, of children's first triumphant laughter as they cast lines into the vast sea. Arthur never charged a penny. He led free fishing trips for underprivileged kids, those who'd never seen the ocean, never believed in unconditional kindness. On those days, he'd stand at the bow, hands on hips, his toothy smile fierce with warmth. And Tide's Grace, true to her name, carried gentle grace across troubled seas. That morning, the waters lay calm. Arthur rose early, polished every rod, inspected each life preserver. 15-year-old Lily Harper, her tangled braids and clear laughter a gift, helped him stack buoys and ready life jackets. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and fresh pastries from Mrs. Louise's bakery 3 houses down. Arthur placed a hand on the Hope plaque. His eyes drifted toward the horizon, and he whispered, "Today, we share again." He cast off the lines. Tide's Grace shuddered as her engine roared. But before the wheel could turn, a black SUV slid to a halt at the dock's entrance. A U.S. Coast Guard officer stepped out, face as cold as steel, eyes locked on Arthur. "Show me your papers," the officer demanded. No courtesy in his tone. Calmly, Arthur opened his case. He produced every document: boat registration, community service certification, children's medical waivers, each stamped and signed by local authorities. But the officer shook his head, curt. "This vessel violates commercial regulations." Arthur met his gaze. He paused, then replied evenly, "I'm not in business. This is a charity run. I've never taken anyone's money." His explanation changed nothing. Minutes later, a patrol boat cut through the waves to the dock. Its wake rocked Tide's Grace. 3 more officers boarded silently, bound Arthur's hands with plastic cuffs, and forced him to kneel on the deck as if he were a criminal. Arthur did not resist. He clutched the old photograph of him and his crew from that storm rescue mission. He lifted his eyes, still sharp, still unbowed. "This boat brings the children joy," he said. But there was no response. The engine growled. Tide's grace was towed away, like a memory erased from the town's flow. Arthur was led ashore and seated on a cold wooden bench. Lily, horrified, grabbed her phone to film and cried out, "They're arresting Arthur!" Within minutes, the video was online. The community fell silent. A crowd gathered at the dock. No shouts, no curses, only a profound ocean-like hush before the storm. Arthur did not show anger. He flipped open his battered logbook, its pages filled with the names of hundreds of children who'd sailed on Tide's grace. The final page was blank. He lightly touched it, a faint smile playing on his lips, an unspoken belief that tomorrow another child's name would fill that line. Mrs. Louise brought him a steaming coffee, setting it beside him, but Arthur did not drink. His hands remained wrapped around the photograph. That afternoon, the Coast Guard issued an official notice. Tide's grace was impounded for administrative violations. The town went silent, yet the fire in their hearts, and in Arthur's eyes, did not dim. Port Fourchon's residents began to act. They penned letters. They signed petitions. They called public meetings. The children who once rode Tide's grace, now workers, teachers, doctors, shared their memories. One of them said, "My first trip with Arthur is why I pursued marine biology." And amid the rising tide of public outcry, everyone saw it was not merely the story of an old man and his boat. It was the story of kindness, of steadfast resolve, and of a community remembering its roots. Arthur remained seated on that wooden bench, but this time he was not alone. At dawn's stillness on the Port Fourchon docks, Arthur Ramsay sat motionless on an old wooden bench. His gaze never wavered from the horizon, where his boat Tide's Grace once lay at peace. In his hands, he held a weathered black and white photograph of himself with his old crew, a living relic of camaraderie and those glorious days at sea. His silver hair caught the fragile sunlight, but his eyes burned bright as tempered steel. The harbor, once alive with footsteps, fishermen's calls, and the creak of wooden wheels along planks, was now shrouded in an eerie silence. Not the calm of early morning, but the hush of something broken. News of his arrest, his hands bound by Coast Guard officers, his beloved boat towed away like contraband, spread through the region like a smoldering storm, igniting decades of dust. From Mrs. Louise's bakery to the corner cafe, from Uncle Mike's boat repair shop to the little church with its rusted bell tower, everyone whispered the name Arthur Ramsay. No shouts, no curses, just hushed voices and choking emotion. Their eyes, like the entire harbor, waited for one resounding blow to shatter this injustice. Tide's Grace was more than an ordinary vessel. She symbolized a silent mission. With her oak planks weathered by decades of storms, her wheelhouse roof dulled by peeling silver paint, and that small plaque etched, Hope, she had carried food to isolated homes during the 1985 hurricane, introduced impoverished children to the salt sea, and offered them their first triumphant catch, and a man whose pockets were never full, but whose heart overflowed with kindness. Arthur never sought payment. He craved laughter, eager eyes, and moments when children dared to believe in unconditional good. "One smile can conquer a day," he would say, his voice as deep as the morning tide. "The future doesn't start in school, it starts in trust." Yet now, Tide's Grace lay impounded as evidence. Arthur, The man who had steered her through countless stormy nights was left unarmed, yet unbroken. He offered no resistance. He clutched that old photograph. He flipped through his battered logbook, each page bearing a child's name, each name a story, each a scar etched into the memory of a man no longer young. A volunteer teen, Lily Harper, posted video of his arrest to TikTok. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The caption, "They're arresting Arthur," struck viewers like a thunderclap. Comments surged. "This is a crime against kindness. Free Tide's grace. He taught me to fish when I was 7. Personal memories entwined across the nation. A New Orleans reporter, once a passenger on Tide's Grace in 1995, penned a tear-stained piece. "Mr. Ramsey didn't just teach me to bait a hook. He taught me to be human." Hundreds of miles away, at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Ramsey, Arthur's only son, sat stunned, watching Lily's clip. In his hands lay the 1985 relief mission file, when his father had navigated Tide's Grace through savage waves to deliver food to flood-bound towns. His father's voice echoed, "You're my flame. If I fall, you must keep the fire alive." Now that flame was not just in his heart, it blazed in his eyes. Nathan rose swiftly, called his air commander. "I need a helicopter squadron. Destination, Port Fourchon. Reason, honor." Back in Port Fourchon, Arthur still sat, unaware that millions were watching. Mrs. Louise approached and placed a warm roll in his hand. "The whole town stands with you," she whispered. Arthur said nothing. He merely opened his logbook, its final page still blank. He stared at it long, as if wondering whether there remained time to write another name. The Coast Guard's official notice was terse. Tide's Grace impounded pending investigation of operational violations. Cold, formulaic, callous. The mayor was silent. No defense, no statement. But the townspeople were not. Former volunteers formed an online group. Justice for Arthur. Hashtags like #BringBackTides, Grace, and #Ramsey. Is Hope trended on Twitter and flooded congressional inboxes. Lily raised her camera again. She did not cry. She looked into the lens and asked plainly, "If Mr. Ramsey doesn't deserve our protection, then who among us still deserves hope?" Another wave of emotion washed across the internet. A retired sailor posted, "He rescued me from a rooftop when floodwaters reached my waist. I swear I'll never let him stand alone again." Nathan, eyes locked on his phone, nodded as he received confirmation. "Squadron ready." He stepped onto the tarmac. The rotors spun, not for combat, but for justice. Port Fourchon's docks no longer lay silent. They trembled, not from wind, but from a community's heartbeat. Residents gathered, quietly yet resolutely, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes trained on where their symbol of hope once rested. Someone softly asked, "Who will bring Tide's Grace home?" No one answered, yet everyone knew that day was coming. And Arthur, though he did not know, still sat there, his eyes bright as embers, ready to stand once more. The whir of helicopter blades thundered across Louisiana's sky, shattering the heavy stillness of Port Fourchon's harbor. It was not mere machinery. It echoed back from 1985 relief missions, from silent oaths never carved in stone. Today, it returned as a declaration of war, not on foes, but on oblivion, on injustice, on a system that once turned its back on kindness. At the heart of the pier, where once fishing rods clattered, fish thrashed in iced bins, and children's laughter rang out, Arthur Ramsey stood steadfast. In his hand, he clutched a photograph of his aged crew, men who had weathered storms with him, steered hope through every wave. His grip on the frame was fierce, as if holding on to a piece of himself. His eyes were fixed on his boat tide's grace, impounded not by time, but by the government's seal. Yet those eyes, bright, unyielding, shone like a veteran blade, ready to cleave the darkness, suffocating this coastal town. Tide's Grace was no ordinary vessel. Its oak hull, grayed by decades of storms, might seem worn to strangers. But to Arthur, and to generations of underprivileged children here, it was where dreams took root. The launch pad for laughter, each rod cast a promise. "Every smile is a victory," he had said, his voice husky as dawn breezes yet brimming with strength. "These children are America's future, and our mission is to light their path." Now, that boat was confined, and Arthur, its helmsman through tempests and hearts, stood unarmed, yet still a warrior. Online, the video titled, "They're Arresting Arthur," continued to spread, igniting like wildfire, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of views. Comments rained down like hail. "Release Tide's Grace! Arthur is the soul of the harbor! Don't let America forget its good." A former volunteer, now an activist in Baton Rouge, posted a heartfelt essay. "In 1998, I was a boy afraid of the ocean. Arthur Ramsey taught me to fish and to believe in humanity. He was more than a teacher. He was the father I never had." That post struck like a missile, piercing social media, landing on national news, infiltrating every home and every weary American heart drowning in bad news. At Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Florida, Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Ramsey, Arthur's only son, stood frozen amid tactical maps and radio static. In his hand, the 1985 relief file, his father's handwritten promise, no child left behind. But Nathan wasn't reading that paper. He stared at Lily Harper's video on his phone, the 15-year-old volunteer's plea. "Arthur is our hope. Who will save him?" Like a dagger to the heart, Nathan realized this was no longer just his father's fight. It was a test of compassion's place in our age. Clenching his fist, he commanded in a tone as decisive as any battlefield order, "Scramble the helicopter squadron. Head to Port Fourchon. Reason, honor." Arthur did not know the drama unfolding behind the scenes. He still sat on that pier, his gaze unbroken, his face carved from resolve. Mrs. Louise, the baker who greeted fishermen with pastries and coffee each dawn, approached with a paper cup of steaming brew. "You are the light of this place," she whispered. Arthur nodded but did not drink. His thoughts were on the faded pages of his logbook, the names of every child he'd guided to sea. Each name, a seed of hope, and still he believed. This land remained fertile. The Coast Guard's notice was clinical. "Vessel detained for regulatory violations. Cold as a winter gale." The mayor, who once thanked Arthur after floods, now stayed silent. But the community did not. Veterans, ex-volunteers, teachers, chefs, drivers, all formed Free Tide's Grace. The hashtag #FreeTidesGrace trended nationwide, from Louisiana to Michigan, from the East Coast to small Montana towns. One wrote, "We may forget the day Arthur saved us, but we will never forget how it felt to be saved." Lily live-streamed again. She did not cry. She stood like a youthful sentinel amid the digital tide. "Arthur is more than a kindly old man. He's this town's beacon. If we let him be taken, we let darkness win." A retired sailor reposted a 1985 clip, a younger Arthur through torrential rain, rowing to each swamp-side home to deliver food and rescue children from floods. "Tide's grace," he wrote, "is the forge of character." In that moment, Nathan looked at his phone one last time. The message blinked. "Squadron ready?" He issued the order. "Go!" Above Port Fourchon, engine roars crescendoed. Below, Arthur, still unaware a nation watched, sat steady, like a flame no storm could extinguish. The roar of helicopter blades shattered the hush at Port Fourchon's docks as Tide's Grace's bow emerged beyond the barrier. That weathered vessel, once bound like a prisoner, now glided into the light like a king returning from exile. The wooden plaque in the wheelhouse, carved with hope, remained intact, its grooves deepened by time. A freshly presented American flag unfurled in the sea breeze, tracing arcs of freedom against Louisiana's sky. Without a word, the crowd formed two ranks along the pier, allowing Tide's Grace to pass as if in a sacred procession. Arthur Ramsay shed no tears, yet his eyes glimmered with the light reserved for those who have known both war and kindness. He stepped slowly onto the deck. His worn leather shoes whispered like knocking on memory's door. Nathan steadied him by the shoulder, fearing perhaps that his father might vanish, or that all he represented could vanish with him. A line of former Navy sailors in uniform stood at the boat's bow. Each raised a hand in salute. No words spoken, only absolute respect. In that moment, Tide's Grace was more than a returned boat. She was a symbol reborn, of memory, of faith, of humanity that cannot be buried by paperwork or power. Mrs. Louise, wiping away tears, placed her basket of warm rolls on the pier, a silent tribute. A young boy, son of a fisherman, crept forward and offered a crayon drawing. An old man at the helm under a sunny sky, children fishing at his side. Arthur accepted it with trembling hands and set it beside the newly mounted plaque. "The future," he whispered, "begins with small things like this." A voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Colonel Hayes stood before the crowd, not as a stern officer, but as a citizen. "Port Fourchon," she declared, "has marked a symbol, not by deeds of war, but by acts of kindness." She proclaimed this day by order of the Navy as Tide's Grace Day, a day honoring all who place compassion before self-interest. The crowd erupted in cheers. Strangers embraced. They pressed letters, small gifts, heartfelt notes into Arthur's hands. "Thank you, sir. I remember that 2002 fishing trip. My mother said you saved my uncle from the flood." Arthur nodded, unable to recall every story, but understanding deeply he was not alone. As Tide's Grace was secured back to her berth, Nathan helped his father onto the deck. The little artist and a handful of other children, representing the new generation Tide's Grace would serve, joined them. Arthur stood in the wheelhouse, one hand on the helm, the other holding the plaque, his gaze embracing every memory, every laugh, every storm, and every moment he once thought himself merely an old man with an old boat. "Let us begin again," he announced, loud enough for the front row to hear. "For hope never ends." Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, a girl's hand shot up. "Mr. Arthur, will you take us fishing again?" Arthur smiled, the smile of a man who has faced the fiercest storms and still seen beauty in the wreckage, and nodded. "Saturday," he said. "Bring bait and hearts ready to believe." Applause erupted once more, this time not from outrage, but from new beginnings. The Coast Guard quietly withdrew. No blame, no push. Even the officer who signed the impound order bowed his head in silence, as though realizing that what had unfolded here transcended any statute. As dusk fell, sunlight melted like honey across the water. Tide's grace rested gently on the waves, as if a story were still being written. Arthur sat at the bow, flipping through his logbook, now listing new names, children eager for the next journey. Nathan sat beside his father, his eyes steady. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," he whispered. Arthur said nothing. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and squeezed gently. "You came at the right time. That is what matters." Above them, the naval squadron's rotors circled on, guarding not just Port Fourchon's skies, but the invisible treasures of memory, loyalty, and one small boat named Hope. And so, in what seemed the most ordinary corner of the American South, a quiet revolution unfolded, not through protest or politics, but through kindness passed from one person to another, from a silent old man to a community ready to stand. Tide's grace was set free. But perhaps what truly found freedom that day was faith. Arthur Ramsay stood amid the deck of Tide's grace, his feet planted as firmly as roots into the oak planks weathered by time. He needed not utter a word. The photograph of his old crew remained in his hand, and his gaze, sharp as a blade honed by decades of service, fixed on the children chattering as they prepared for the next fishing trip. The air aboard the boat buzzed with excitement. Yet Arthur's presence was the pillar that held it all together, silent, steadfast, irreplaceable. Tide's grace, once bound like a criminal, had become the epicenter of a movement spreading from Port Fourchon to the East Coast. After Colonel Evelyn Hayes's stirring declaration, the Navy not only returned the vessel, but officially funded the charity Arthur had built over 40 years. What began as a humble effort by a lone veteran at a quiet dock had become a national symbol, where kindness stands anchored as a legacy to protect. Arthur did not see this as victory. To him, true triumph lay in the laughter echoing behind him, in the eager eyes of a child holding a rod for the first time, in the small hand clutching his in the ocean breeze. "Every rod is a chance for a child to learn trust," he often said, his voice hoarse yet steady, like the oak in his hull. "And trust is the first step toward a good life." Nathan Ramsay, his son, now supported him more than anyone. In his Navy aviator uniform, Nathan served as the bridge between his father and the military, living proof that compassion can be inherited. Having grown up aboard Tide's grace, he understood every creak of the timbers and every layered meaning in his father's few words. Today, he managed the network of ports in the charity program, scheduled trips, liaised with officers, and still found time to board the boat beside his father, quietly observing the lessons Arthur imparted to the children as a teacher without a podium. 15-year-old Lily Harper, the volunteer whose video changed everything, now served as Arthur's official assistant. Under the southern sun and her radiant smile, she guided the children with cheerful encouragement, often echoing Arthur's words. "No one learns to fish in a day, but anyone can learn to love the sea in an afternoon." In her leadership, youth's enthusiasm fused with the grit she had learned from the man she called mentor. Port Fourchon had transformed. Its community no longer survived by fishing alone. They lived by something greater, sharing. Fishermen once silent now refitted boats to support the charity voyages. Mrs. Louise once solely a baker, organized fundraisers, hanging small signs that read, "Support Tide's Grace, one roll equals one smile." Local children crafted wooden nameplates at the dock, carving "Thank you, Mr. Arthur" in earnest, childlike script. A new charity center, Arthur Ramsey Foundation, rose near the harbor, its red roof sheltering a gallery of photographs. Grainy shots of Arthur and Tide's Grace in the 1985 storm, alongside dozens of handwritten letters recounting stories of those he had saved or inspired. One letter, penned with trembling hand by a fellow veteran. Another, illustrated with childlike drawings. Another from a person hundreds of miles away, touched by Arthur's tale. Online, the "They're Arresting Arthur" video had become more than a viral moment. It evolved into a digital monument. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares. It sparked dozens of similar initiatives nationwide. The hashtag #FreeTidesGrace transformed into #LegacyOfGrace, accompanied by new local projects from Maine's coasts to California's shores, where veterans, fishermen, and youth joined hands to launch similar programs. A volunteer in Baltimore wrote, "Mr. Ramsey didn't just teach me to fish, he taught me to look at someone and see their worth." Arthur never appeared in interviews. He did not speak on television. When offered a national honor, he simply replied, "Thank you, but I have rods to repair." To him, glory was a muddy child landing their first catch, a girl tying her line for the first time, Nathan standing by his side, quietly saying, "You never made empty promises, Dad." Each trip at sea, Arthur maintained the ritual of updating his logbook, now bound in new leather with fresh pages. Yet he wrote each name by hand in the same ink. Every name was a memory. And sometimes, after the children disembarked, he stood alone at the stern, clutching the old crew photograph. He said nothing, yet the fleeting smile revealed he understood. Somewhere, his brothers in arms were watching and feeling pride. Port Fourchon was no longer an ordinary harbor. It was a haven of faith. Tide's Grace, once detained, now sailed daily, carrying young souls and an unspoken message that well-preserved kindness can withstand anything: time, power, silence. And Tide's Grace, this vessel of compassion, still set forth, not to catch fish, but to sow hope. Arthur Ramsey stood tall on the deck of Tide's Grace. His gaze was more than a look. It was a lighthouse illuminating memory, resolve, and an unquenchable faith. In his hands, the photograph of his old crew lay like a sacred relic, not merely marking the past, but bearing witness to a journey that rose above injustice. Tide's Grace, once held captive, now burned as a beacon of charity at Port Fourchon. She told the story of a veteran, a father, and a community that refused to stay silent in the face of wrong. Beside Arthur stood Nathan, his son, heir to his spirit, and Lily, the girl who had sparked the entire movement, watching the children bait their lines. In their eyes danced reflections of days long past, as if seeing Arthur in his youth. On that deck, heart full of trust, hands open wide. Port Fourchon was no longer just a southern harbor. It had become a living emblem of compassion that shatters every social barrier. Tide's Grace, with every crack and weathered plank, proved that even the oldest things can ignite a generation. Arthur clutched the photograph tighter. A quiet smile curved his lips, a smile that glimpsed the future in the children's eyes. And this story is far from over. It lives on in everyone it has touched. If that flame has kindled your heart, share this tale with those you love across America. Click follow to spread journeys of kindness, of fatherly love, and of loyalty that never fades. Let Port Fourchon touch your heart and set it ablaze.